There's so many folks who have different definitions of
Yeah.
Web3. How would you describe Web3?
The first year of the web is sort of 1990 to roughly 2005.
Right.
And that,
Essentially like the dot-com boom.
the dot-com
right?
boom, yes. A key characteristic of that era is that there were certain open protocols, like there's a protocol called HTTP, which is sort of the protocol of the web. There's something called SMTP, which is the protocol of email. These were protocols that were designed by academics and governments to be kind of shared resources so that anyone could build on top of them. And that enabled people like, let's say, Larry Page and Sergey Brin to build Google on top of the web. And they knew if they built it, they kind of knew what the rules would be on that public resource. Those rules wouldn't change, right? And they knew that if they built a big business, they could own that business.
Right, and there was this wave of companies that came and went, and there were, there was
look,
a gold rush.
Yeah, it was a gold rush. There
Sure.
were certainly disasters,
Yep.
famous disasters, but there was also like amazing stuff. Like
Yes.
Amazon was
And
1994.
emerged was Amazon and a lot of
Yeah,
these
and
big
Google.
companies that transformed society.
That's right. And then there was the crash, like 2001 or so. Actually, one thing that's interesting is the real crash was mostly telecom. The internet wasn't as bad. It was bad, but not nearly as bad as like the WorldComs and things, if you go dollar-wise. But anyways, it was 2001 through 4. I actually was involved in the internet then. It was a pretty dark period in the sense of just a lot of entrepreneurs, they were having trouble raising money, and just sort of the general sentiment I think at the time was internet's a really cool thing, but we way overestimated sort of the business value there, but then you had this sort of rebuilding period, and that's what we call Web 2, and that was things like Twitter and Facebook, and YouTube, and sort of this next wave. And that next wave, entrepreneurs started to realize that the internet could be you could do more kind of two-way things instead of just sort of read-only, we call it. And in the sort of Web 2 period, people started to realize, hey, this is really a fundamentally new medium. Instead of sort of copying magazines and brochures, we can invent brand new things. And that's sort of like Facebook was a brand new thing, right?
Yeah.
There had been like dating classifieds and things, but the fact that it was interactive and you could friend somebody and you could have these various kind of interesting interactions. YouTube was really a brand new thing. Instead of sort of taking kind of TV from CBS and movies, it was like you can upload your own video.
Yeah.
It's like two-way. So we say that the internet was sort of read only. In Web 1, it became read and write. You could write back as a user. You could contribute back.
Right.
You weren't just sort of a passive consumer anymore. Now that was great, and and then we had mobile phones layered on, and iPhone 2007, and then of course that whole explosion that people have lived through. And it's been a lot of great things as a result.
Right. I remember there was this moment in 2008, the recession, you had the iPhone had come out, the App Store had launched.
That's right.
Lots of entrepreneurs, super creative time.
It was a really creative time,
and it was almost like anything was possible. Out of that came Uber, Instagram, all of these apps that fundamentally transformed society.
That's right, yeah. So I think it did, so there were what we call mobile native apps. So there was you had Uber, Lyft, Instagram, later on TikTok, Snap. Sort of this new era of kind of social media. You also had, in addition with mobile, it just dramatically accelerated the adoption of the Web 1 companies. So like Google was, if you look at the numbers, like the number of mobile, Google users in the world went up dramatically with the rise of mobile. And you now have, I think 5 billion people or something have mobile phones. You have Android phones you can buy for $10. It made it dramatic. So somebody can spend $10 and often get very low cost wireless internet and use services like Google for free, right? That's an amazing thing. So I want to make it clear when I talk about Web 3, there's a lot of amazing things that Web 2 did and those entrepreneurs did, but there was one big drawback, which was the kind of architecture of those systems were very centralized. And so with Facebook or Twitter, you're giving all your, they're doing a service for you, they're letting you sign up and use their service for free, but in return, they control all the data, right? And as a result, they control the network. And so I now have, I've been on Twitter for years and I have a bunch of Twitter followers, but if I want to leave, I have to if they want to add more ads or they want to raise the price or whatever they want to, or, remove me from the service or whatever they want to do, they can do, right? Or change the algorithms, right? Now for me, it doesn't matter as much, but if you run a business, for example, on one of these services and they change the way the algorithm works, which happens a lot. If you talk to smaller businesses, they'll say, hey, at the beginning, I built my business on Instagram and it was great and I got all this stuff. but they changed the algorithm on me, right?
Right.
And they can just do whatever they want because they have full control, because it's no longer, unlike the Web 1, these were community resources, these are now private resources.
It's like if Twitter were to disappear tomorrow, you would your information, your data.
It would all disappear.
You would disappear with it. Media, I remember even being at CNN, there was a moment where the algorithm for Facebook really emphasized media content. They made a lot of changes based on trying to optimize for Facebook. That algorithm changed. That changed the nature of the media landscape. It's very much these companies own you to some degree.
And by the way, this is not, I have friends at these companies. I think they're good people at these companies. I think it's the fundamental problem is the incentives of these systems. You have these corporate-owned networks, and the incentive in the beginning is to attract people to your network. And the incentive later, once you've got a critical mass, is to extract money from the people you attracted.
Right. I mean, not to state the obvious, Andreesen Horowitz is invested in a lot of these companies,
and we are,
and Facebook.
And we are, and we were, our firm was involved with a lot of these Web 2 companies. And still has, has a practice group that invests in those areas. For myself personally, around, I don't know, I guess I joined the firm in 2013. I led our investment in Coinbase in 2013. And at the time, crypto was Web3 was much more Bitcoin focused. But around 2015 or so, I started to, I guess a couple of things. Like one is I started to feel this Web 2 thing I'm describing, I started to feel like something was wrong with this. And I think a lot of my peers did too. Like this is not what we signed up for. These companies had to get big enough so that the incentives switched, and they could just go, change the rules on CNN and do all of these things and kind of get away with it. Because for a long time they were competing. Like Twitter was not, until probably 2015 or something, it wasn't this kind of entrenched business, and they couldn't play those games. But at some point they could. And I sort of personally started to feel like it was off. I didn't really want to do this again, like invest in a startup, try to build a big network, and then change the rules on the network participants. It didn't feel like a good activity to me. And then meanwhile, look, I mean, it's also, we're a venture capital firm. We're looking for new tech opportunities. It said, this is a really interesting new thing happening with blockchains and crypto and what we now call Web3, which is a new architecture for building internet services. So my pitch deck, I had to go raise money myself. My pitch deck said, this is a new era of internet companies that will be owned and operated by communities instead of owned and operated by corporations. So that's sort of one way of thinking about Web3. It's this new emergent kind of internet movement where digital services can be owned and operated by communities. And specifically, there's a very important new concept in Web3 called tokens. And then there's what are called NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which are tokens that can represent a picture or access, behind the scenes access, or a video game object, or a whole bunch of other different things. And so what's interesting about tokens is it's the first time where kind of users and creators can actually own a piece of these digital services, truly own these digital services. When I own a token, I own that token like an NFT. Let's say it's created on Ethereum. I own a secret, password that gives me and only me the ability to control that token. And that's a new thing that didn't exist on the internet prior to Web3. And it's a very powerful idea because now you can let the community member, like imagine an Uber of the future or an Airbnb of the future, where the people that built the network, the drivers, the hosts, actually got to own some of it and control it, right? So both had the economic upside of having contributed to building this network, but also the kind of governance upside of like having a voice, right? I think a lot of people right now feel like if you go on a lot of these social networks and things, people don't seem that happy all the time.
Yep.
And I think part of why they aren't happy is because they feel like it's sort of digital feudalism, like they're not really participating in the system. And so Web3, in my mind, opens up that possibility.
It's this idea of you own you to some degree.
Yeah, it's it's just like it's not that weird if you think about the real world, like the physical world, like you own your, maybe you own a house, maybe you own a car, maybe you own your clothing, The internet's very strange so far. Like every time you go to a new website, you have to you play video games, you have to buy a new set of virtual goods. You think about the physical world, there's parks, there's public highway systems. The internet, there's very little of that. It's 5 megacorps right now with 10 other smaller corps or something that kind of own everything. And we just have to play by their rules. That we've forgotten that like in the real world, we're used to this concept that like it's not everything is owned by 5 megacorps. You can own things.
Well, you wrote about this era as an opportunity to own a piece of the internet, which is a pretty radical concept, right? Yep. I mean, this idea of digital ownership, right? We spend so much time on Instagram and Facebook, but we, as you say, like we don't own it. So what exactly, for folks who might not understand that concept, like what does that mean if the future is to own a piece of the internet?
Yeah. So like, I mean, so for example, there's something called Ethereum. And Ethereum is a popular kind of computer where you can build applications on top of it in the same way that it's kind of a computer that lives in the sky, and sort of like the cloud, except it's not owned by, when people say the cloud, what they're really saying is like Google or Amazon. Here, it's a true kind of community-owned computer, and you can write applications for that computer. And the owners of that, and nobody runs that system. It's run by a community. There's the original creators like Vitalik and some other people. They're influential, but they don't own it or control it, right? But you can actually own a piece of it. And if you buy or earn an Ethereum token, you own a piece of that. You're truly kind of an owner.
You wrote that Web2 platforms really depend entirely on creators for content, and you were just talking about that, yet give only scraps back. And you said that's not sustainable, and that
I don't think it is. I think the system is broken and is going to break, the Web2 system, and specifically, let's start with the best one, which is YouTube. So YouTube, if you go create a YouTube channel, they have a rev split with you, right? So they make a certain amount of money, they show ads, and they take 45%, and they give creator 55%, right? So you run the thing, you get 55. So that's reasonable. At 45% is a pretty high tax in the real world. Like if you had to pay 45% tax, you ask an average small business, for just existing, it's hard to run the business, but still, they're better at that, right? So what does Twitter give? If you create a popular Twitter account and they show ads, how much do you get? You get zero, right? What does Facebook give? Facebook gives zero. Instagram gives zero. TikTok gives zero, right? And look, they did this, they kind of cleverly got people to sort of say, hey, it's important to have a following, and you want to be relevant and modern, and so people did this. But, and it kind of made sense in the beginning. Look, I did it too. And so like, I'm not blaming people, but at this point, and look, it's fine for me. I have a different job. My job is not Twitter. I have a different job. But if that's your job and you are a creative person and you've been convinced by these big platforms to give away all of your work for free in exchange for little hearts on the thing, like that's not a good economic model. And like, why does Facebook make 100 billion in revenue and the creators get likes?
You've said that Web2's take rate is Web3's opportunity.
That's
you do
right,
think that the last era of the web, that the business models have been fundamentally broken?
I think that they are extremely extractive. They figured out, it's the old Tom Sawyer. He kind of tricked his friends into painting the fence for him and earning his allowance. Like there was this initial exchange, as I described before, of like, hey, you can share your thoughts on Twitter for free. And it started off very innocuous and fun. And I've been on Twitter since, forever.
We were all part of it, right? And it certainly has transformed society and given a lot of benefits in many ways, right?
And it has, and I don't want to dismiss that. I think these are important, and I have a lot of respect for these entrepreneurs.
Right.
But I think fundamentally, as these things scaled, the model started to break down. Like it worked well. Twitter worked well when it was a place for people like you and me. I think you were early too, like to share some news. When it became like a core economic resource, where like millions of people depend on it to find their audience and to make a living. Like a lot of small businesses now, I mean, they almost all do depend on Google and Instagram. I mean, like the whole world, your lawnmower salesperson down the street depends on these services. Like everyone depends on them. They sit at the center of the modern economy. Like it was a great model when it was like us, talking about tech and what we had for lunch. When it's mediating the entire global economy, I don't think it's as good, and I think it's going to break because there's no reason we can't offer better alternatives to a lot of these creators. And I'm happy to walk. So like an example is an area I'm very excited about right now is music in Web3. And the reason I'm excited is music is an area where people are very passionate about music. They love music, but the economic model for musicians is really broken. So as an example, Spotify has 8 million, roughly 8 million artists, and of that, 14,000 make 50,000 a year or more, which is roughly the average American salary, and that's before costs and everything else. So like a tiny percentage make a reasonable living. This is not all Spotify's fault. There's a whole chain of people, including the record labels, who take from that. But that is not a good model for musicians. And a lot of musicians relied on offline merchandising and touring pre-COVID, right? So and the reason that worked for them is they could go direct to the fans. It didn't have 10 layers of intermediaries taking your money. You could just go to the stadium and sell T-shirts, right? Now COVID took a lot of that away. Hopefully it'll return. But that model, like the fact that musicians haven't found a good way to sort of monetize online, I think is a shame, and I think will change. And so like we have a bunch of investments, Web3 investments, that we think that already are showing to provide a much better business model.
I think a lot of people from the outside look at NFTs and say, okay, this seems like a lot of hype, and it also seems super inside baseball and inaccessible. But on a societal level, I'm assuming that you think this can be transformative. So can you explain what the larger picture could be?
Sure. So we have an investment called Sound XYZ. What Sound XYZ does is every day they take a kind of a smaller musicians who right now really aren't making any money, de minimis money on the internet, and they basically do NFT drops every day. You'll go and you'll have a bunch of like kind of cool, I think of it as like album art and other kind of cool visuals. Some of those things give you kind of backstage access if they have like a show and other things. So there's sort of think of it as a combination of something that's collectible and kind of has artistic value, with also things that might give you some access, with also kind of things that give you some status, like, oh, you were the first fan. A lot of, the sort of this phenomenon, like I was the first one to find that musician, right? Because if you're early on before they blow up, that's cool, right? And then also, I think there's a really important thing is a sense of community. And then, another one is patronage. It's sort of a less financialized way to do it. You're supporting them, you're actually buying something. It's, I think, probably a lot of the motivations when you think of people that collect art and things like this. And the beautiful thing about Sound XYZ, so this is a startup that's only been around for, I think, a month and a half. They do a drop a day. Every single day has sold out $10,000. I think it's 90% plus, maybe 95% of that goes to the musician.
Right, you could own
That's right,
a piece of art, or there's even more utility to an NFT for, say, musicians. You might get something else if you buy the NFT for a certain band you like. You could potentially get something else that comes along with just this digital asset.
That's right. So think of like, it's kind of like in the offline world, to give some analogies, like if you buy a piece of art, like a painting, you're not buying the copyright. You're not buying the ability to sue somebody if they use it.
Right.
You're just buying that exact, just that physical thing. And it has meaning because it has, because you feel some physical, those atoms were once like in the hands of the painter. Like it's a very, by the way, I mean, if you think about offline ownership, it's a very kind of interesting philosophical thing. In art theory, they call it the aura. That like, why does Duchamp's urinal or like Warhol's tomato can, like why do those have sort of cultural value? It's this aura that we all feel. Wow, that's the real one. That's the non-real one. Like, right? Like someone could create an exact replica of the Mona Lisa, but we'd all still feel like it's not the real one, right? Because there's some, and of course, even physicists could go test it and maybe it's the same, but like, it's the aura is different, right? Yeah, because like this idea that, we're cultural creatures, like we're social creatures. Like we care that this is the real Mona Lisa, that this is what the Mona Lisa that you value and I value and culture values. And it's not all just like physics and numbers and so this is sort of introducing these same concepts to the internet. And so when you own this, this CryptoPunk and someone else can right click and save it, someone else can copy it, in the NFT mindset, that actually makes it more valuable. In the same way that, the Mona Lisa becomes more valuable if more people share that image because you own the original. And so that's one of the big common misconceptions of NFTs is that they create scarcity.
Do you think that Web3 will impact democracy?
I think Web3 can transform social networks. And I think probably most people think social networks have transformed, how information is shared, how politics happens. I think there's some very important questions around governance of social networks. I think that these networks have become such important resources in politics that I believe that the right way to govern them is through kind of a democratic method, which blockchains and Web3, this is sort of the default way that Web3 thinks about it. I think the idea that right now, if Twitter changes their algorithm or removes somebody or decides to classify something as misinformation, I don't think I know what that process is. I don't know if anyone outside of Twitter knows what that process is. I don't know who's making that decision. I think that we've passed a lot of power to pretty opaque groups of product managers at 5 or 6 companies. I think you're going to very likely, if this continues, see a segmentation of the internet by geography. I don't think that a lot of countries are going to like the fact that people in product management groups in California are deciding their politics in their country. Like, I think, again, all this stuff worked well when it was people talking about tech and what they had for lunch. These systems were great for that. I think now that they control kind of global politics, like, I think that we should rethink how they're done. I think there should clearly be moderation on social networks. Like, I don't think they should be a free-for-all. But I think, for example, with the first era of the web, we did a pretty good job moderating. Like, if you think about the World Wide web pages, those are taken down all the time. Like, but you take them down through a due process, right? And there's a bunch of ways you do it. But like, one of them is a due process. You can't put illegal content on the internet. You can't, registrars can remove you and web hosting providers can remove you. But it's kind of, you have thousands of web hosting providers. So you have some kind of process at least. I'm not sure that's the perfect system. But I am sure the perfect system is not people that are unaccountable. I don't even think are publicly facing. I think this is handed way too much power. I mean, look, there's politics. I tend to focus more on the economics of it, which is I think giving that much economic power to those people, at least because I just come from the business world. Like I'm less of an expert in politics, but in the business world, so I think the economic side of it is kind of the side I probably talk about more. Look, will the internet get more important over the next 100 years? I think so.
Will our relationship with the internet get even more complicated or less complicated with the rise
Well,
of
that's
Web3?
the thing, and like VR and metaverses and these things people talk like, and will people spend, I think all trends point to people spending even more and more time in more immersive experiences, more time, higher engagement. Now will we go back to working in offices? Will you socialize with your office, colleagues in a coffee room or on a metaverse experience? Like, who controls those experiences? Is it going to be Facebook? Facebook has changed their name to Meta because they want to control it. Is that a good outcome?
But who creates, if someone isn't controlling them, who's going to create the laws that help with our children's safety in those worlds? And
that's right.
And who's going to help if there's security issues in those worlds? So it certainly is a time where it's a pivotal time. I'm imagining as you invest in a lot of these ideas, where we're at the beginning, again, of a new era, and we didn't do a lot right in the last era. So how are you guys thinking about those things?
So I don't have, just to be clear, I don't claim to have all the answers on what's the best way to govern the metaverse or something, right? I think that the idea of having Facebook unilaterally decide, I think to me is pretty obviously a bad idea of what those standards should be. I think having the government do it is a much better idea, as an example, like having, some kind of process, which is sort of historically how we kind of did these things. I think kind of in between that, I think of it as a more like internet democratic systems of like people can opt in and opt out, the way kind of the first era of the web worked. So these are important questions. I think one of the unfortunate things going on right now is that there's the Web3 concept, NFTs, blockchains are very controversial. A lot of people have decided that it's all just kind of scams and I don't know, get rich quick schemes. And as a result, those people are not participating in the development of this technology. This is going to get built. Like I'm 100% sure. I've bet my career on it. We're going to invest in a lot of companies. I know all the smartest people I know are working on this now. Like I am highly confident this whole set of technology is going to get built. And I think it would be great if we had more people with who are interested in politics and interested in these topics joining in instead of dismissing it.
Well, I think it's hard. There's so much of a barrier to entry, right? You have to have, even more so than there was with Web 2, right? And it's certainly personal to me. I rode the last tech wave to the top, right? Interviewed a lot of you guys early on, and there was this whole utopian viewpoint of we're going to change the world for the better. And I truly believe that people believed that. And now we're sitting at this exciting moment in internet history where we're talking about decentralization, and we are talking about owning a part of the internet. Let's be honest, a lot of these companies, even that you guys are invested in, are built largely by men. You have this virtual real estate boom that's happening that I find fascinating, where people are purchasing all this real estate in Decentraland and Sandbox, which are these metaverses, and you have to have a ton of money in order to do that and participate, and that's also largely men. If we want to build a better world, and I have to ask the human question because we can't sit here at the beginning and not ask that human question. It has to be built with a diverse demographic, people of color, women, non-binaries, and if they don't have a seat at the table as we build out the rules of Web3, how do we build a better world? So what can we do? And you're certainly in a position of power.
I spend all day, every day trying to get more people of all, genders and everything, race, we would love just more people to join us. So 100%. A lot of these systems don't, unlike Web 2, don't collect demographic information. So I'm not sure, Ethereum users, we have no idea, what the demographic breakdown. That's sort of the nature of these systems, is they just don't do it. So, I think it's probably fair to say that what you're saying, I don't doubt that probably it's majority male. And I'd love to have people of different, also very diverse groups enter. I'd like to have people of different politics.
So how do you fight the digital divide?
I think that one myth around it, I think is that somehow you missed it or something. I think this is keeping some people out. I've heard about crypto and Web3 and NFTs, but I missed it. And now there's all these rich people and I can't get in. I just think this is incorrect. It's very, very early. This is to me 1993 on the internet or something. The second thing is like the whole core of the things like I've talked about before. It's about this whole concept of decentralization. Like, what does decentralization mean? It means pushing money and power out to the edges instead of being in the middle. So like, I believe at its core, like there will be, just like the .com thing, like we talked about earlier, like there's going to be people that make $1 billion and people that get rich. And this, it's true of all economics. It was true of the railroads. It was true of the car and the steam engine and like all these other things. But and in that process, you can have like a Henry Ford and other kinds of people, that the Wright brothers or whatever. But the technology itself will ultimately be hopefully democratizing. And I think if we build it right, we'll push more money out to the kind of edges and away from the center.
What Web3 principles do you think could apply to traditional media, especially as it goes through this real transformation?
One thing I would say is I believe kind of advertising was the original sin of the internet. I think it's led to a lot of kind of unfortunate incentives. I think those incentives include the incentives of big companies to sort of collect increasing amounts of information on people. I think we see this with Google and Facebook and companies like this. Somebody wrote a blog post that it's almost like they call it the adversarial internet. Like you're constantly like, they're trying to get something and follow you and do all these things. Like it shouldn't be like this. Like it just shouldn't, there's no reason it needs to be like this. So there's that. And then I think what advertising's effect on media. You know much better than me.
Yep.
But I think I don't think it's had a positive effect. I think it's led to, this kind of accusations of like clickbait and maybe like sensationalism and just like short attention span kind of stuff. I don't know. Like
it certainly creates different incentives, right? And as someone who's been in the traditional media landscape for a long time, I think advertising, I look at it, whether it's Facebook or cable news network, I certainly think there are incredible complications with the concept.
Yeah, this should be the greatest time in history for people like you, people writing, people doing music. But I believe that we sort of had this detour, and we had this detour through the Web 2 land, algorithmic feeds and ads. And you go on there and they just like bombard you with ads for Hawaii vacations and things. And it's not a good user experience. They're extracting data from you. I don't think the travel company even benefits from it because they're probably paying a high rate. Like the whole thing is just, to me, broken. And it's not the internet that we ever set out to do. But like to your point, I think, you said people were utopian, kind of overly optimistic in Web 2, and that could be the case here. But I think, I guess my point would just be, let's try it, and we would love for more people to join us and bring their voice into it, and not just have it be people like me. They got to decide to kind of come join us.
I want to ask you about identity in this era, which is super fascinating. An underlying principle is this idea that these digital selves, that people can have anonymity on the internet, but recently there's a larger debate as these NFT projects grow into multi-million dollar, sometimes multi-billion dollar companies. Should the folks behind them remain anonymous, right? Yeah. Or as they become these multi-million dollar entities, should they need to reveal their identities in order to be accountable as the same type of accountability that other companies are afforded? So where do you fall?
Well, I mean, look, just to be clear, like anyone who starts a company in the United States, like you're not anonymous to the government. You've filled out legal paperwork. You are like legally liable. I think there's a difference between that and like how do you present yourself as a sort of public figure. And
if people are signing on to these projects and whatnot and don't.
I guess in my ideal world, there would be, I think that the ideal way to do identity would be what I would call faceted identity. So facet. So like, you reveal what you need under that occasion. So if you want to borrow money, you reveal to the lender the pertinent financial information. If you have some healthcare issue, you reveal this other aspect, right? What we have today, I think, is a pretty broken system where pretty much everyone's social security number and pretty much every other piece of data has been probably hacked many, many times. Is leaked many, many times. The model today is you give all of this information over to 100 different companies outside of maybe Google and Apple and a few very high-end tech companies. Basically, everyone's been hacked over and over. And so the current model is just broken. What Web3, the way it works is you literally personally control your identity. It's something you keep with private keys in your wallet. And then you reveal what you need to reveal under the circumstances. There's no intermediary in the middle to get hacked, right? So I think, that's just broadly kind of how I think about identity, is that like, it's sort of on a need to know basis and should be fundamentally controlled by the person and not by corporations or other kinds of people who have other sets of interests. Now, the specific thing you're saying, if you have a big enough company, should you have some to reveal some? Maybe, I don't know. I don't like.
And how do you protect folks in the community that are entering these communities and ensuring that people behind them are legitimate?
I guess what I would say is I don't think the current system is good. It's just all hacked and leaked, and there's just, people have very little kind of privacy. I think that the idea that people should that we should have more choice for people as to when they reveal. That said, look, there's a trade-off, as you say, and there needs to be obligations too.
Jack Dorsey tweeted in December attacking the fundamentals of Web3.
Yeah.
He said, you don't own Web3, the VCs and their LPs do. It will never escape their incentives. It's ultimately a centralized entity with a different label. Know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
As a VC who's led the movement in this space, to that criticism to Dorsey, what's your response?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll say I have a lot of respect for Jack Dorsey building Square and Twitter, and I think, he's been a big advocate for decentralized technologies like Bitcoin. I think that's just factually, that criticism is just not factually true. So, for example, all of these, the things we invest in, these kind of Web3 applications and systems. To give you an example, in the old style of venture capital, when Sequoia and Kleiner Perkins invested in Google in 1998, I think they own 20-something%. The norm in our industry and at our firm is sub 5%, in almost all cases. So I think just factually, the idea that I wish we owned more of it, but it's just factually not true. Because a lot of these things, the way they work is these kind of Web3 systems is they save a big portion of the ownership for the community. And so the norm in Web3 is at least half of the ownership goes to the community and the people that build the system. And usually there's some kind of way in which those are kind of given out over time for behaviors. And so it just totally changes the economics. It means that VCs like us just end up owning a lot less, just as a matter of fact. The second thing I'd say is I think the Web3 movement, I think people that think it's just sort of me and some of my friends tweeting are really kind of misreading the situation. I think it's, if you just sort of go on Twitter and look at all the buzz and the chatter, there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that are really excited about this. I'm just sort of one of the people who I think, I don't know, has maybe helped popularize it and explain it. So, I guess I thought it was kind of flattering that he thought that we.
You mean it was flattering when he said you're a fund determined to be a media empire, not Gandhi? You were a troll, Chris.
So the Gandhi thing, I did not quote. The quote I gave was not from Gandhi, and I checked that because so that was not. I was not quoting Gandhi.
Quick response to that.
I thought the whole thing was kind of funny. I'm really not upset. I don't know. So I like him. I like Jack Dorsey. I have a lot of respect for him. I just disagree on the merits. I think this is a big movement, and it's just much broader than us. I'd love to be. I think I'm part of it. I'd love to continue to be part of it. I'd love to be at the center of it. We're a venture capital firm. I'm not going to pretend like we don't try to make money. We do. And look, and if we can be the most successful venture capital firm of this era, the way that, let's say, Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia were in the prior year, Web 1, that's my job, and I'll try to do that.
Every day in this, because so many people want to get into it, there are new scams, new hacks in the space. So how can people stay safe that are getting in it?
Yeah, in my view, that happens, and as it did in Web 1 and Web 2. My own feeling is that the press focuses, that sort of cherry picks and focuses much more on those hacks and scams. So just to give you an example, I think it would come to surprise to a lot of people that the Bitcoin and Ethereum have never been hacked, ever, period. There have been things built on top. So Mt. Gox was a cryptocurrency exchange that used Bitcoin,
right?
But Bitcoin itself and Ethereum itself, which are the kind of two base layer blockchains, have never ever been hacked. So look, people, it's to me, it's like any kind of new wave where you're going to have things that are overvalued. You're going to have scams. You're going to have, so Carlotta Perez is a financial historian who's written this famous book on the kind of history of technology and financial cycles. And the way she describes it is you basically have this moment where some new thing is invented. So it's like the railroad and the steam engine and the internet, first era of the internet. And then you have this kind of, financial euphoria. Investors get involved and just inevitably, people are not going to accurately price things. And then often they priced too much. This is sort of the internet bubble. Like this just happens in these kind of, now, but that said, like it's very important, like the internet bubble, you had, you know, we say it's a bubble, but like you had Amazon, you had Google. And in fact, if you look at the overall value of the companies 10 years later, it actually went up over time. Now there was a lot of pain, and I'm not dismissing that in the middle of it, but like I think most people today would agree that as much as there was like euphoria and bad stuff, that in aggregate, that financial event, the dot-com boom, I think people would agree is a societal beneficial thing. And so I think it's the same, like Web 2, there was a lot of, you were there was a lot of bad stuff too. There were a lot of failed startups. I think it'll be the same thing in Web 3. I think it's just the nature of these things. And then my own feeling is just for the press has, it's not just Web 3 in general. I think the press, the attitude of mainstream press towards tech is very different today than it was, let's say 10 or I don't know when it changed. At some point it changed.
Well, I think a lot changed with tech, right? And you talk about that too, right? A lot of the things that were promised in technology with the good also came to bad, and a lot. I
think what happened kind of is that it's Mark Andreessen says we used to be the pirates and now we're the Navy. Like Silicon Valley was the pirates and then became so
it was a bunch of kind of renegades who were doing this, and the minnows became the sharks.
I think that's right, but here's where I disagree. Here's where I would ask the press to reconsider the posture, which is
all right. Well, I'm technically I have my own company, but I'm technically as someone who's been in the press my whole career.
So I think the difference is I think today there is the Navy. The Navy is Web 2, and the pirates. There are pirates, and the pirates are the kids building Web 3. I mean, they're mostly like kids. They're mostly like around the world. They're you know technical. A lot of them are technical. They're idealistic. They want to live on the frontier. They don't like the way the internet is today. So I just think it's nuanced. I agree that Silicon Valley is the Navy. Right. I'm not disagreeing with that. It's a very powerful cultural force and should be held, you know, sort of truth to power. Like, but I do think that you can't lump everything together. And in fact, sometimes you can fix things from the outside, but sometimes systems can also be fixed from the inside. And so, you know, so I think like, or I don't think it's the inside. I think Web3 is kind of from the outside, but I think you get my point. Like, I just don't like how it's all lumped together as like tech bros and tech, and it's all this sort of thing. I think it's very different. And I think, look at not just Jack Dorsey, there's a whole bunch of Web2 people who spent a lot of time attacking people like me. Like, and these are, I think these are genuine, like there's fundamental core philosophical disagreements between people in these different movements. Look, if we succeed, those companies will be significantly less important and powerful. And that's the goal, by the way. Like, this is not like, let's help these. I think they'll survive and be around, but like, we are trying to take them on. I just wish it would make those distinctions between people trying to preserve the status quo and people who aren't happy with it.
So as a former member, right, of both 60 and CNN, and someone who really believes in so many of these movements, what I would say is there's so many times we sit across from folks who are building the algorithms that shape our democracy and our children and our humanity, and sometimes those questions get lost early on, right? And this is why I think we have such an exciting opportunity with this next era of the internet to ask those questions and to really try to learn, right, from the last era. And can things be too polarized and oversimplified and without nuance? Of course, especially in this current environment. But do we have a responsibility on both sides to give this the opportunity it deserves? Like, absolutely, I think. So that's just my message. For, you know, so we can
even within the Web3 community, for example, there's a lot of debates. Like, you know, some of these systems, are they vectors of re-centralization? Like, we think we're decentralizing.
Well, that's kind of what Jack Dorsey said, right? Which is like, it's just really, you know, Web3 is kind of a lie. It's just another era of centralizing.
I mean, I think there's always a risk. I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to be sort of like naively optimistic. A very important concept is network effects on the internet. So network effects are this idea that, like, as Twitter gets more valuable to me, as other people use it, right? And it's kind of the core way in which these services gain power. The way I think about it, in Web 1, there were big companies in the center of it. There was Amazon and Google, but the network effects were owned by the public. They were, you know, if you had a website in Web 1 and you didn't like your web hosting provider, you were at Rackspace using them to host your website, and they started doing mean stuff to you, you can just switch this thing called the DNS record and move your website to another website, right? Because the network effect was held by the World Wide Web, the open protocol. And so that put a very strong check on how big and powerful those companies could get. Now, that broke at some point, clearly. Web 2 came, and that that kind of check on centralized power faded in its relevance. And I believe, though, with the way Web3 systems are designed, that like we're building things in the Web 1 mold where there's very strong checks on power. You will have centralized companies in the mix, but the network effects accrue to public resources like the Ethereum blockchain and not to centralized companies. So that got lost as Twitter's, people saying stuff to each other. Like you lose
something gets lost on Twitter. Surprise!
I know, shocker.
Crystal ball. 10 years from now, what does this world look like in the context of Web3?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we're sitting here in Menlo Park. All of tech, Silicon Valley. The strong form, what I hope, is that this is the way you build internet services in the future. You don't think about building an internet service by setting up a database and an office and having a big company. You think about building an internet service by rallying a community and building public resources and building them in this kind of Web3 model where the people that help you build that network are also benefit benefit both economically and in terms of sort of governance rights from the development of that system. I think the questions we're talking about now, if you agree, and I think most people would, the internet is kind of the defining technology of our time. It will become more and more important over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. What we're talking about today is what are the systems that will govern the economics and the control of that network. And I don't think we ever really grappled with this in the last 30 years in a serious way, partly because it was sort of handed over to entrepreneurs and technologists and just whatever. The process was such that it just never really, those questions that ended up being so important and governing our politics and our economics and everything else, we never had a really serious kind of discussion around it. And so that's what my hope is. My hope is we do have a serious discussion. The movement grows, more people enter. It's a more kind of inclusive set of people at the table deciding how should money and power work on the internet over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And like maybe I'm wrong about some of my specifics. Maybe it's not NFTs, maybe it's something else, but I don't see many people having this conversation in a serious way, and I think we should have it.
You grew up in Ohio, so not in Menlo Park and in Silicon Valley in the center of all
Ohio,
this.
small town Ohio.
Small town Ohio. Did anything you experienced when you were younger really play into this idealism of this next era?
I think for me it was more, I was an entrepreneur before I was in venture capital, and I really bought into the vision of the internet, of this sort of utopian internet, I guess, growing up. And I thought that this was
all the way from Ohio?
Yeah, I mean, I would read stuff about, I don't know, and like I read a lot of people who were very idealistic, and I bought into that idea that this would be, that anyone in the world could have a business idea, have a creative idea, and and kind of compete at a level playing field. And maybe that was naive, and look, maybe it's over. And I get this criticism a lot, like it's it's a naive optimism or something, that it can be fixed. We ran that experiment and it didn't work. And I don't know. So yeah, I bought in early to the kind of this idealistic vision of the internet, and which was kind of the dominant view. I mean, I feel sometimes like what happened to all these people that also believed in it? I don't know where they went.
You majored in philosophy, so I think there is this connection between philosophy and internet culture that it seems like you really sit at the center of.
I guess that's what kind of attracted me to the internet in general, was this kind of philosophical, the kind of values of it. And it just didn't end up that way. And I guess the question now, I think there's sort of one point of view is just it's over and it's going to be like TV was or something, and there's 4 channels. And, sorry, not broadcast. Think about broadcast TV when there were like 3 channels.
Yeah, broadcast TV. So much has changed, right? And what will television look like?
But the internet could be like that. It could be just Google, Facebook. Like that's the danger, right? I don't think that's good for anyone. I don't think it's fun. So, and then maybe the only way to save it is regulation. We have to go break these companies up. I think I'm kind of skeptical a lot of that stuff will work. You could decouple Instagram from Facebook, and I don't see the network effects changing or the power changing. Like, I don't think that's actually going to be effective. So this, to me, is by far the most powerful way, I think, to kind of shift the power and control on the internet. So.
You're optimistic.
I am.
And in my experience, watching so many tech founders I knew who were really optimistic.
They're all broken and jaded now.
They're not all broken and jaded, but you are super successful, right? On the Midas list, that's
what motivates me here?
Yeah, well, I would just say sometimes in my experience, the closer you fly to the sun, the farther you get from Earth. how do you stay grounded?
I mean, to be honest, before the Web3 thing, I really didn't know if I wanted to keep doing tech. The thing I enjoy when I get up in the morning is like talking to smart people and hearing new ideas, right? And the reason I liked tech was for a long time in the early web and Web 2, I felt like that's what I did all day, right? And then, and this is not to, there's other people that there's a lot of important things being built for the last sort of, I don't know, 8 years or something, but it wasn't things that got me kind of excited. They were more, I believe they were kind of more incremental innovations, and that's very valuable.
It wasn't true disruption, is what you're trying to say.
And like, I don't want to, again, I'm like, that's valuable. It's important to sort of take technology and spread it out and kind of, take it to new industries and things like that, but it wasn't that exciting for me. And now what I get excited by is working with entrepreneurs, meeting with entrepreneurs, interacting. There's very few chances you get. I think probably this, and we talked about mobile, but I really think this is as big as the internet, Web3. Like, so I think
wow. That's an extraordinary statement.
Yeah, I think this, well, I just think it's such a radical new way to do. I mean, like, mobile's very important, but it was sort of an extension. It was sustaining as opposed to disruptive, I think, in some ways. So that's the other thing. I just feel like there's so few times in kind of tech and everything else that you get an opportunity like this. And so that just kind of gets me really excited.